And actually, what I'm really interested in seeing evolve from teams is how they see moments like this as opportunity, not
Mm.
just something to survive through, but actually the place in which maybe you can even jump the shark.
Oh, I'm going to listen in. We're recording this in the week that tariffs were announced, they were rolled back, they were put back, right? So just a lot of disruption, a lot of uncertainty. And I think one of the things that I've noticed is just the leaders that I'm working with, and in particular the top teams, in
Hmm.
in terms of coming into, how do you navigate and in particular make decisions in this level of uncertainty. And of course, some of it is like literal day to day. I mean, you sort of pick
Hmm.
up the
Hour to
newspaper and
hour.
yeah. I mean, often, right? But I think more generally, it speaks to a leadership capability that whether or
Hmm.
not all of this is happening or not, I think is something that teams just need to pay attention to, which is what do you do with uncertainty?
Yeah.
Aside from wish it wasn't there, which is
Hmm.
what I'm prone to do. But barring that working, how do you navigate it? And I thought we
Yeah.
could have a little bit of a conversation around what both we're noticing with leaders and teams that find
Hmm.
themselves kind of in these moments of uncertainty. What are some of the habits or
Hmm.
behaviors that can help them navigate through it? And maybe even what are some of the patterns that folks can get stuck in? So I thought we could explore that just a little bit. And I'd love to
Yeah.
hear, your experience with it, because you work with an awful lot of teams that are trying to
Mhm.
grow and, navigate a marketplace that's, shifting, like you said, by the hour sometimes.
It's been an interesting week for me because I've had a lot of opportunity to talk to leaders all over the place. And when I tell you the reactions have been so varied, they really have. Everything from companies who will actually benefit from the changes in tariffs, companies that
Yeah.
will actually benefit, international companies that will benefit from that, all the way to people who would be in some really challenging situations and circumstances. One of the things that I have noticed when they're not aware and thinking about it, leaders tend to go inside as if they're going to be able to solve the complexity and
Yeah.
uncertainty that's there. And so they almost like retreat and go inside trying to think through it. But the reality is that the complexity of the situation and the complexity of most organizations requires that they connect out. And so I think for me, one of the practices I've been coaching leaders on all week is
Mhm.
the moment you feel any level of dysregulation in your system, whether that's like oh my gosh, this is too much, or I don't know what I'm going to do, you kind of feel that engine, and you start to go in, immediately look out and connect with your colleagues because
Mm.
they have a vantage point and a set of information that you simply couldn't have because the pace is going so quickly and the complexity is so broad. And I've got a couple of different examples that have occurred this week that when leaders actually reached out, it was like they had just the nugget of information that someone on their team across the globe needed, and they had information that they needed. And when you put it together, it was just more powerful. And I found that
Mhm.
really interesting. I was fascinated by it all week.
Well, it's interesting that instinct to retreat
Hmm.
from it and to go in and to try and figure it out, right? I
Yeah.
think this
Yeah.
that I was thinking about what are some of the reasons that we react
Mhm.
the way we do to uncertainty,
Mhm.
and I think part of it is this feeling of a loss of control. I mean, to the extent that we have control, but at least a perception of control, let's call it,
Mhm.
where there's some linear physics at play where I do X and I can predict with some level of confidence that Y will happen. And I think
Mhm.
as soon as that starts to break down, and
Yeah.
X and Y are not even variables anymore, and now I'm having to deal with R. And I'm curious where you point leaders to notice that initial, whether it's an instinct to go in or to figure it out alone or to look for more information rather than
Uh-huh.
acting. Like where do you point leaders to notice that starting to happen? Whether
I
it's
don't.
in their body or in their mind.
Mhm.
Like how do they catch themselves early enough in that trigger that they can actually be at choice and decide, I remember Betsy said I need to go connect with someone. I'm going to go do that.
I think it depends on their reactive tendency of choice, kind of how their character structure is built. So if they're a person who tends to go to a controlling place, they'll feel it. I think they'll feel it in their body first from what I'm hearing. And also from my own experience, I can tell you, like for me, I feel it right in my solar plexus. It's like an engine turning on. And when that happens, I go, oh, look at me trying to solve what a client might do about tariffs. I don't have that expertise, nor do I have the vantage point to do that. But my body desires to do that as a way to gain control over a situation. I often find from my clients who are high in protecting, or if they kind of rely on their ability to think really, really smart, that they'll tend to go a little bit quiet. So oftentimes when I notice they're getting quiet, I'll just reach out and ping. And what I imagine is they're lost in their heads, right? It's like they're going to that distance because they're trying to figure that out. And then my complying or heart-based clients that are more relational in nature tend to want to talk more. All of that has one core element, which is the way in which you act quickly. And so I'm not suggesting not acting quickly, but I do think whether you feel it in your gut or you notice it in your own silence or your own over talkativeness, that just immediately taking perspective on the desire to do some sort of action immediately pulls you into a subject-object relationship with it. So now you can have control over it. And you might say, do I want to try and think through this? Do I want to try and talk through this with someone, right? And those are all fine. But as long as you have it doesn't have you. It tends to be a bit more successful. Yeah. How about for you? What's the alert device that you give to clients on that?
I know for me personally, it's definitely, I notice in like a tightness in my throat. I go quiet, you know, and I think it has to do with a desire for some level of clarity and certainty, probably more certainty. I don't know what's going to happen next. And so as a result, I kind of turn on all of my sensing and I stop doing. Right? Which I think is understandable because you're just trying to understand the landscape. I think with clients, there's a couple of things that I've noticed, both ones that have struggled and then others that I think have done this quite well. So the first in terms of the struggle is this idea of going quiet, going in, trying to figure it out. The other thing is I think there's a confusion of certainty and clarity. And I think you can be clear without being certain. And I think there's a conflation of the two, right? So there's a lot actually you can be clear about in terms of what hasn't changed, the mission, the values of the organization, the impact that we have in society with our customers. So there's always something to get more clear about. I think leaders think that they want certainty and they want to know. And often what they really want is for you to be clear. What do we know? And then in particular, and this kind of leads me into what I've seen some of the great leaders do, they're willing to state what they don't know, and that's okay. That actually not knowing and figuring it out together, that's actually the magic of teams. And so rather than not knowing as something I need to hide from or push away or not let anyone realize is actually going on, they actually put it right up in front and say, listen, there's a lot I don't know. There's a lot we all don't know. We've been here before. I was working with a team just recently, and they were dealing with an awful lot of change and complexity and uncertainty, everything we were just talking about. The leader reminded them, we went into the COVID era where the entire organization went virtual. No one was at the office. It wasn't clear if you could even transact business in this way. And we figured it out. And now in hindsight, of course, we kind of can see how the dots connected and there's a little bit of a coherent story there. And I think reminding teams and reminding each other that we've been in these kinds of places before and what were the behaviors that actually got us through them.